Okay, here in Part C, just gonna finish off with the, gun is ready, and now you want to save as a new version because now you're gonna actually start thinking about like the arms for the first person, sort of representation. And, you only need arms. You don't need a lot of geometry or a lot of armature. It's just easier sometimes to try to use an existing meta rig. There could be complex inverse kinematics and other things with the bones, but eliminate the bones that are not needed, and you should be able to maybe work it through. You could always, of course, manually start with a single bone and just do a root bone for the chest, and then do clavicle bones and maybe a neck and head, upper arm, forearm, hand bone at the wrist, and then the fingers, each joint. Sometimes starting with your own bone system from scratch is easier because you're more comfortable knowing exactly that there's no special properties or parenting or constraints. I mean, it's always a little bit of a, you have to understand if you're starting from a rig from somewhere, if you import a rig from, say, Mixamo, not even this rig has everything. I mean, I had to add hand bones and finger bones. Basic meta rig, humanoid, only has a hand bone at the wrist, and that's it. It sort of ends there. So, of course, there's another version of it that has more anatomy, more bones, but it has a lot of face bones, and then you're just deleting those face bones. Using pose mode can help you get a sense of what's happening with your setup. Edit mode, of course, is used to build up the bones from existing bones. You click on the tail of the pre-existing bone and you hit E, and then E is to extrude or extend the skeleton by adding an extra bone. If you use S, that helps to scale the bone. G is to grab the bone to help move it. Um, it's just in Canada, the Canadian Consumer Household Corrosive labeling is a skeletal hand that nicely reminds you of all the joints and all the sort of bones in the hand. It's something I always, when I'm doing this, it reminds me of my childhood looking at bathroom chemicals and wondering, what corrosive was all about. It stays with you. Yeah. Before getting into like adding flesh to your bone, putting meat on your skeleton, as the saying goes, maybe bring the gun over and just have a sense like, is it kind of good? Like, is it within sort of close enough scale, or do I have to maybe make the bones bigger, longer? You could make the gun smaller. It's somebody with small hands holding a big gun. Of course, keep in mind that with the bones only, it does look sort of a little bit off, but once you add some sort of representation of flesh or putting meat on the skeleton, but you kind of get that sense of perspective, and that was the whole idea of using the rig in the first place as a sort of scale. Again, could delete the pre-existing rig after you've got your gun model and just start from scratch. Depends on your style. don't want to be too finicky. You just want to make sure kind of, if you change the poses a little bit, if the guy maybe, you know, flicks his wrist to kind of do a bashing or a melee kind of like bashing with the butt of the gun, does your anatomy or is it possible with the way you have it sort of set up? Bringing in cylinders to basically put on the bones to become digits using the rigid rigging technique. Of course, scale down your cylinders and then duplicate them so you don't have to always go back and import a new cylinder and scale it down again. Just duplicate a whole bunch. And it goes without saying, uh, organizing. Naming is a good idea. Thumb 1, for the first joint, thumb 2 for the second joint, thumb 3. Of course, it's the right hand, so thumb 1R, thumb 2R. Wire mode can help sometimes, although probably the most helpful thing in this approach is to not have the bones be in the front and to kind of imagine like you're putting marshmallows on a stick at a campfire. Um, that's really good. Just highlighting here the rigid rigging technique again, that you select the anatomy or the joint in object mode, shift select to get the armature, and then jump into pose mode and pick the individual bone with the blue highlight that you are going to have as the parent, and then you go to the menu, pose parent bone, and then it becomes part of the armature. Here I have the bones in the front still just to kind of help pick it for the parenting, but then I turn it off to kind of see. And it doesn't look exactly like a thumb. I mean, it looks almost like a robotic thumb, but you'll see in a few moments that obviously you can tweak in edit mode the vertices and the sort of scales of things, and push and pull. I mean, if you're making a character with holding hockey gloves, or an astronaut with those thick astronaut sort of space gloves, the sort of articulated fingers, I mean, that's obviously, it's you don't have to do much. This will still work. I mean, keep in mind that as you extend geometry, and even though it's overlapping, because it's separate geometries, it's separate meshes, Unity is most sensitive about when it's a single sort of unified mesh that has a lot of overlapping vertices. You don't want that too much. But when it's separate vertices or separate meshes, the vertices, it's more forgiving to be overlapping, you know. And, so you just play with it. I mean, again, if it's a low poly character, okay, I would fatten up that part, where the hand um, branches off to, separate between thumb and forefinger. And once you get it going, it's just doing the same thing.